Welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. Ready to get into it? Today, we're looking at something that's super important, especially for those of you gearing up for the UPSC exams. We're talking about laws, but not just the laws themselves. We're thinking about what happens when laws get old, like really outdated, you know?
Yeah, that's a great point. It's not something we always think about, is it?
No, not really. We
Yeah,
kind of assume laws are just these permanent things. But, think about it. The world changes so fast these days, right?
right.
But laws don't magically update themselves. So how do we make sure they stay relevant?
Exactly. And that's actually what sparked this whole discussion, didn't it? A recent Supreme Court case really brought this issue to light.
Oh, you mean the one that focused on the Representation of the People Act? The foundation of our entire election system?
That's the one.
Oh.
And it wasn't just about the specific case. The court kind of used it as a jumping off point to talk about something much bigger.
Like a wake-up call for the whole legal system, you mean?
Exactly. They were basically saying, hey, laws need regular checkups, just like you go to the doctor for a checkup. We need to make sure they're still doing what they're supposed to be doing and not causing more harm than good.
Right. That makes total sense, but why do laws get outdated in the first place? What are some of the reasons?
Well, think about it. Technology is constantly changing, social values shift, and new problems pop up all the time, right?
Right.
But the laws don't automatically keep up with all of that, and that's when you start to see those gaps emerge.
And our sources had some pretty vivid examples of this, right? Like the
Yeah.
IT Act, it was written before the internet boom, like before most of us even used email.
Yeah.
So it's no surprise it struggles to keep up with all the new types of cybercrime that exist today,
Totally. And sometimes even laws with good intentions can end up having unintended negative consequences.
like almost backfiring.
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
Like one source mentioned the anti-liquor law in Bihar. It was meant to curb alcohol consumption, but it ended up flooding the courts with bail applications, creating a whole other set of problems.
Oh, and there's that example from Rajasthan too, right? Where a law allows certain groups to raid places they suspect of cow slaughter, which has raised some concerns about potential abuse of power.
Yeah, exactly. Those examples bring up a really important concept: legislative effectiveness.
Legislative effectiveness.
It essentially means that laws need to work in the real world. They have to achieve their goals without creating a bunch of new problems in the process.
Which is something that the UPSC folks should really pay attention to, right? I mean, especially those tackling the Indian polity section. Understanding how laws actually function in the real world, it's a huge part of analyzing different policies and legal frameworks.
Absolutely. It's not just about knowing the laws themselves, it's about understanding the whole context they exist in.
Okay, so we've talked about how laws can get outdated here in India, but what about other countries? How do they deal with this? Our sources mentioned a few interesting approaches from around the world, didn't they?
They did, yeah. The UK, for example, they have something called the Law Commission, which is dedicated to reviewing existing laws and recommending changes. They even helped retire a law called, wait for it, the Witchcraft Act.
The Witchcraft Act. You're kidding.
Nope, it was a real thing.
Wow. That just goes to show, even in countries with long histories of democracy, laws can stick around way past their expiration date, right?
Exactly. Having a system to review and update laws regularly is super important.
What about Australia? Our sources mentioned them too, right?
They do. Australia has a specific body focused on making sure laws are still relevant to what society needs now. And that brings up an interesting question. Could India benefit from something similar?
Now, that is a question worth pondering, especially for those of you prepping for those UPSC essays.
Absolutely. It's not about rote memorization. It's about making connections, comparing systems, and thinking critically.
Right. So there are models out there, but we also need to be realistic. What are some of the hurdles India faces when it comes to reforming its laws? What makes it tough?
Well, one major challenge is politics. Laws can get tangled up in political agendas, making it hard to review them objectively.
Like those recent debates around the farm laws. Our sources mentioned that, showed how messy things can get, right?
Definitely. Another challenge is the sheer complexity of India's legal system itself.
Yeah, there are so many interconnected parts, right? Like changing one tiny thing could have ripple effects all over the place.
Exactly. Like that NJJC case mentioned in our sources, the Supreme Court struck down a law that was supposed to reform how judges are appointed.
It proves even well-intentioned changes can have those unexpected consequences.
Absolutely. And then there's the issue of public participation. If you want effective legal reform, the people affected by these laws need a voice.
But that's not always easy, is it?
Nope. Our sources pointed out there's often a lack of awareness about how laws are made and changed, which makes it hard for people to get involved.
It's like a vicious cycle.
Hmm.
Okay, so we've talked about the challenges,
Mhm.
but India has some tools for keeping its laws up to date, right? Like, what about the Law Commission? That seems like a good place to start.
Definitely a key player. The Law Commission of India has a big role in researching legal issues and suggesting changes to the government.
Can you give us like a quick rundown of the Law Commission itself for context?
Sure,
Well,
it's actually been around for a long time, going all the way back to the British Raj.
wow, really?
Yeah. The first one was established in 1834. It actually helped shape major legal codes that we still use today, like the Indian Penal Code, the Criminal Procedure Code, big stuff.
Wow. And after independence, we got our own, right?
Right. The first one was set up in 1955, and the most recent one, the 23rd Law Commission, just started last year in 2024.
So it's got a pretty broad scope, right? Like, what all does it do?
Pretty much everything. It reviews existing laws, suggests getting rid of outdated ones. It proposes new laws that are in line with the Constitution.
And I think it also looks at how the courts themselves are functioning, right?
It does. It offers advice to the government on how to improve the whole judicial system.
Okay, so it sounds like a powerhouse, but our sources also mention some limitations.
Right. The Law Commission, even with other bodies like the Administrative Reforms Commission, they often lack resources or a clear mandate to review all laws regularly and proactively.
So it's more like they're reacting to specific issues that pop up rather than having a system to catch problems early on.
Right. And that's where some of the potential solutions come in. Like, one key idea from our sources is to really empower the Law Commission, give it more independence, more resources to do its job well.
So like more funding, more autonomy.
Exactly. Another idea is to use technology. Imagine using platforms like MyGov to get public input on legal changes.
So citizens could actually contribute their perspectives directly.
Right. And we could even use AI tools to analyze all that legal data and spot areas that need attention.
Okay, those are some good starting points. But the big question, the thing I really want our listeners to think about is this: what role can you play in pushing for a better legal system in India?
Yeah, that's a great question to consider as we move into the next part of our deep dive.
So we've been digging into the challenges of keeping those laws up to date, right? And how crucial it is to be proactive about legal reform. This stuff is gold, especially for those of you aiming for the UPSC exams. Because it's not just about memorizing articles and laws, is it? It's about showing you can actually analyze real-world stuff, real issues.
Right. Those examiners, they're not looking for robots who just spit out facts. They want to see you connect the dots, think for yourselves. And that's exactly what this deep dive is helping you do, giving you the tools to really get it.
Okay, so how can we actually do that? Like, how can we, citizens, future policymakers, aspiring UPSC folks, actually help build a better system for reviewing laws in India? Where do we even start?
Well, first of all, we got to recognize something, right? Legal reform. It's not just the government's job. It's on all of us. We got to own that.
Our sources pointed to a few key areas where we can make a difference, starting with like how resources are allocated.
Right. Definitely. The government's got to step up and prioritize this stuff. Legal reform needs proper funding, invest in institutions like the Law Commission, because a strong legal system, it's like the bedrock of a stable society, isn't it?
It's true. It's like investing in good infrastructure or education. Everyone benefits in the long run.
Exactly. And then there's capacity building. Like, we need to make sure people, civil servants, judges, law enforcement, and even ordinary citizens have the knowledge and skills to actually engage with the law, to understand it.
That's so true, because if people don't even understand the law, how can they help shape it? How can they be part of reforming it?
Right. So education and awareness, these are key to making sure citizens can contribute to a fair legal system, right? One that works for everyone.
Our sources also highlighted something else that's really important: learning from other countries, like seeing what's working for them and adapting those models for India.
Absolutely. No need to reinvent the wheel, right? We can look at the successes and the failures of other countries and apply those lessons here.
It's like when India set up the National Green Tribunal that was inspired by other countries, and it's made a huge difference in dealing with environmental issues.
Right. It shows that, borrowing good ideas and tailoring them to fit our needs, it can really work.
Okay, so we've got the challenges, we've got the tools we have now, and some potential solutions. What are the big key takeaways we want our listeners to walk away with from this deep dive?
Well, number one, laws aren't fixed, right? They gotta change as society changes. Understanding this dynamic nature of law, that's like the foundation for understanding the whole legal system.
And number two, India needs a better system for reviewing and reforming its laws. We got to strengthen existing institutions like the Law Commission, explore new approaches like using technology, and most importantly, make sure the public is involved, right?
Yeah.
People need to be part of the process.
And finally, it all comes down to this.
Mm.
As citizens, we have a responsibility to engage with the legal system, to speak up when things need to change. Staying informed, being part of public discussions, making our voices heard, it all matters.
Especially if you're prepping for the UPSC,
Right.
right? Showing the examiners that you get these complexities, that you can analyze the Indian legal system, that you can offer your own critique, that's what will set you apart.
It's like you're not just preparing for an exam, you're preparing to make a real difference in India's future.
We've got all the sources we talked about in the show notes, so be sure to check those out if you want to dive deeper.
Absolutely. And if you found this episode helpful, insightful, share it, especially with your friends who are also on the UPSC journey. Spread the knowledge.
Now, as we head into the final part of this deep dive, let's zoom out a little, look in the bigger picture. What does it really mean to aim for a just and equitable legal system? Like what values, what principles should be driving our efforts? What should we be striving for? So we've talked about outdated laws, the institutions in charge of reform, lots of details, right? But now let's zoom out. Big picture time. What's the goal here? What does a truly just and equitable legal system look like in India?
That's a million-dollar question. It's deeper than just updating laws to match the latest tech or social trends. It's about ensuring the law does what it should uphold. Justice, fairness, for everyone, no matter who they are.
It's about the values behind it all, isn't it? And this is huge for UPSC folks, right?
Yeah.
Because someday they'll be the ones shaping policy, impacting so many lives.
Absolutely. Future leaders got to think about ethics with every law, every policy. Does it include everyone? Does it protect the most vulnerable people? Those are the tough questions they'll be facing.
And for our listeners studying Indian polity, this links right back to those core principles of the Constitution: justice, liberty, equality, fraternity. These aren't just fancy words. They're the building blocks of a fair legal system.
Exactly. Any reform effort, these principles got to be the compass. Think about it. Even a well-meaning law, if it goes against these basics, it needs a second look, maybe even a complete overhaul.
So it's not enough for a law to just exist. It's got to be fair in how it's applied and the real-world effects it has on people.
It's got to be a tool for good, for progress, for a society where everyone's treated fairly and has the same opportunities.
And that's a constant process, right? Like you don't just pass a few laws and call it a day. You got to keep watching, thinking critically, being ready to challenge things that aren't working.
Absolutely. And that's where you come in, dear listeners, informed citizens. Whether you're on that UPSC path or just care about India's future, you have a role in all this.
So as we wrap up, this is our final takeaway for you. A just and equitable legal system, it's teamwork. Stay informed, talk about these issues, hold your leaders accountable. That's how we make progress.
Remember, law isn't set in stone. It changes with society. By taking part in these reforms, we make sure it reflects the values we believe in. Justice, fairness, equality for all.
Thanks for diving deep with us today. We hope you learned a lot and it got you thinking.
Check out the show notes for all those sources we mentioned, and if you enjoyed this, spread the word. Tell your friends, fellow UPSC buddies, let's keep the conversation going.
And don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and leave a comment. Let us know what stuck with you. Until next time, keep learning, keep asking those tough questions, and keep diving deep.